I hope I'm coming through okay. And we will be joined by Sam as soon as he gets here. But I thought I'd just start off without him and see how we go. I won't get on to the meat of the discussion, which was in the thumbnail and the title, until he arrives. But for that, I just thought I'd say hello and Merry Christmas, I suppose. I said that a lot in the last couple of days. If you didn't catch it already, I streamed all of A Christmas Carol, and I don't think it was my finest work. I think it's a good story, and I did my best, but the technology was against me, and my daughter wanted some of my attention for some of it. So it was a good time, but it's a good story. And if you don't feel like sitting through my version of it, I suggest you either read it, or I think there's an audio drama version of it available through the Alexa Echo. The Amazon assistant who she's got a version of it that you can hear her reading it to you. So we've got 5 people watching, 4 people. How are we doing here? I guess I'll get up some of the actual coverage of this event that we'll be talking about, or maybe a non-event you could call it. Oh, that's funny. If you Google J.K. Rowling, the first couple of results aren't even about the news. It's just about jkrowling.com, Wikipedia, and her Twitter. And then the first result about the news is from the catholicherald.co.uk, which is a website I've never even heard of. I guess it's a Catholic publication. I've got the Order of the Phoenix here, which we're going to be discussing a little bit as an introduction. And just going into it, you should know that I'm a big fan of Harry Potter, as I think Sam is as well. So how are we doing? Hello.
Harry Potter.
How's it going?
Harry Potter.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a cheeky fan.
Good. Me too.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. You sound good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I'm in another weird hotel. I'm in Dubai now, so
great.
Sort of flitting around. I've been to the gym, so I look a bit bedraggled, but
you've got
fine, I guess.
Got a pretty extreme angle there.
Have I?
I don't know. I mean, it's all good. I just thought I'd comment on it.
No, that's all right. It's not a great setup, but it's fine, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, maybe a good place to start with.
How was Christmas?
Oh yeah, that was great. I'm sorry you couldn't spend a Christmas with anyone you love. That's a pretty sad state of things. It's Christmas in Dubai.
Yeah, it was fine. No, I was, rolling in dough and all that, so it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to? What do you think about Harry Potter? Did you read all the books? You saw all the films, or what? You a big fan?
So it's I was a bit of a slow adopter on it, to be honest. It's one of these things I'm really bad at this. When everyone likes something, I kind of instantly try not to like it. Like Game of Thrones, haven't watched Game of Thrones. Haven't watched what's the really popular drug one with the meth?
Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad I haven't watched, just sort of out of principle, because everyone's like, oh, we've all got to watch Breaking Bad on Friday, and I'll bring the popcorn. I'm like, no, I don't like it, just to be an edgelord, I think. If
you define yourself in opposition to what other people like, then you're just as much a conformist as anyone else.
Yeah, probably. You're probably right. But I'm basically a goth, right? They all dress the same. But yeah, I was a bit of a late adopter. I remember actually, it was funny. I read the first one in German when I was on a German exchange. I think it was the second book, and I quite enjoyed it. so then in the airport I bought all the others and then did them. But yeah, I do enjoy it. I think there's quite a lot of it that's ripped out of sort of Lord of the Rings, right? I know nothing's new anymore, but the Dementors always struck me as the same as the Ring Wraiths. The Horcruxes are just the ring, but there's now 7 of them. Always struck me as a lot of sort of plot things were stolen out of Lord of the Rings, but hey ho,
that's archetypes for you, isn't it?
Huh?
Yeah. Oh, that's archetypes for you. Is they come up in stories a lot. There's a when you're dealing with fantasy, I think there's an amount of canon that you're allowed to borrow from. Having dwarves and elves and things. And I think the thing is, someone, as they're talking about in the chat a little bit, it's interesting how a lot of the principles in her books they're really core, like they're really good stories and believable characters and these sort of political issues that they have, and the principles that are demonstrated by her books are not necessarily the same as the principles that she is saying that she believes in real life and on Twitter. I think that's one big problem with the modern day Twitter, culture, is that all of these amazing authors whose books you love, you now have to hear their opinions on things, and you don't get quite the same mystery around them.
Never be your heroes type of thing.
Yeah, and so
J.K. Rowling is, as I understand it on Twitter, I've seen a couple of her things, usually sort of very woke, very progressive. The only sort of thing that came across really for me in the book on that was doesn't Hermione do her sort of free the house elves thing for a while? That was incredibly irritating. And then that just sort of goes away.
Yeah, well, exactly.
But she has quite a strong theme to it. They're quite diverse books, and she gets different nationalities in and things like that. But I didn't feel in the books anything was really forced sort of progressiveness or any sort of identity politics and things like this.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. In the books, Hermione Granger is basically an SJW at some point. I mean, she's a very good character and she's likable, but she is slightly irritating when she starts to go off on this political stuff that she starts sort of a few books in, where she wants to free the house elves, who are basically slaves, and all the wizards are just kind of used to it. But she's a Muggle-born, so she's appalled by the fact that they're keeping this race of house elves basically slaves, and she tries to free them. And it's like everyone else finds it irritating in the same way that we modern people now find feminists and SJWs to be irritating. It's like she got it completely right. It was so perfect the way that Hermione acted and how everyone responded to her in those books. And
she's basically Lisa Simpson, isn't she? There's maybe another aspect, just thinking about it now, just sort of popped into my head. They have the sort of mudblood theme throughout it, that maybe the bad guys in it, the Death Eaters, are a bit racist, like they want the purity of the blood and this kind of thing, which I guess is a sort of Nazi type trope that maybe comes through just in the sort of evil tropes. So maybe there's a little bit of that, but it never feels too forced and too sort of thrown in your face in the books.
Well, what I wanted to bring up is in the Order of the Phoenix, which I think is probably my favorite one of the books. I haven't read them all the times, but in this one, there's a new teacher at Hogwarts called Dolores Umbridge. If you've read this, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I read the sections with her in just to make sure it was fresh in my mind. And she's such an interesting character because she's a villain, but she's not on the side of Voldemort. She's like she's an employee of the Ministry of Magic, which is the magic government, and she acts on their behalf to make Hogwarts sort of more in line with what the Ministry wants it to be. So she's this sort of authoritarian character who's trying to protect all these children, all the students of Hogwarts, by basically declawing them, to stop them from practicing dangerous magic and to make them all believe that there's no danger, nothing's going to hurt them. She's this sort of propaganda queen on campus. And when Harry tries to tell her and the rest of his class that Voldemort has returned and that they're all in danger and they have to defend themselves, he gets in trouble for lying. She tells everyone that he's lying and he has to go to detention, and he has to write lines like in a normal school you have to write lines. I will get my homework in on time or whatever, but he writes, "I must not tell lies," and she gives him a special quill that makes it write on the back of his hand in his skin. When he writes it on the paper, it appears on his skin, "I must not tell lies," and it's probably the only example in fiction that I can think of this authoritarian dictator, sort of tyrannical figure who is doing it in a kind of a kind way. Like they're doing it, she's killing with kindness. Like she's a really cruel person, but she's doing it in the name of being nice and protecting the children. It's like a perfect left-wing fascism almost. And I've never seen that.
Well, she becomes, I think in the end, doesn't she become a sort of Vichy government style sort of collaborator, doesn't she? She's not really putting up much of a fight when the Death Eaters take over as well. So that kind of follows through that idea that she's quite authoritarian. But you're right. Like she's very. It comes across as trying to protect them. There's no problem, but in the end, do some. I remember reading that section and being like, for kids, this is quite dark. Like getting these things etched into your skin and blood coming out for the little kids who'll be reading those books.
Yeah,
it's quite a savage scene the first time in particular.
The books age with the reader and with Harry, which I think is a really good thing about them. So if you're a kid when you start reading it, you're a kind of teenager by the time you're reading this book. And Harry is facing these much more kind of grown-up problems. He doesn't have the same black and white evil versus good issues that he had, like these, sort of mischievous adventures he got up to. Now he has problems like his relationship with his friends breaking down, and he doesn't know how much he can trust Dumbledore. And he's got these sort of, it's a much more grown-up kind of book. I'm not saying it's like it's not War and Peace or anything, but it definitely progresses.
No. They become more nuanced as they have the problems that people of those ages potentially have.
Exactly,
On top of that, all the horrible things that are happening outside.
Yeah. Well, getting on back to what I was saying before about the about Dolores Umbridge, this teacher, the authoritarian one. I think it's interesting to see now how J.K. Rowling is now being a victim of the same kinds of people who are fighting in the name of trans people, who are trying to protect trans individuals, not necessarily with the consent of the trans people themselves, and they're actually doing a lot of damage and being quite authoritarian in the way they're going about it. Do you want to introduce the actual meat of the story that we're talking about today?
Yeah, so I think we're talking about the Maya Forstater issue, aren't they? So this lady called Maya Forstater, she worked for, I believe, an economic charity, and she basically holds two main beliefs. She's been putting out these tweets on Twitter, and those are that people can't have sex as we currently define it, and that sexual self-identification causes problems, and that she'd never accept someone who is defined male or female at birth being in a female or a male segregated space later in their life. And she...
Oh, you've frozen a little bit. You're breaking up. Yeah, Sam, I think you're going to have to repeat about the last 15 seconds of what you just said when you come back. I don't know if you can hear me, but you're completely unintelligible at this point. Yeah, I don't even know if I'm coming through anymore. Yeah, I think we're going to have to... I'll bring up the story while waiting for you to come back. I don't even know if I'm here. Am I even here? Yeah, you've gone completely now. Oh, let's go to the Independent and see if we can get the. Will this work with the screen share? What is this music? This was not a. I didn't ask for this. Okay, that's better. I'm going to start sharing screen. And let's do that one. There you go. This is the mayor for Forestater. I thought it was Forester, to be honest, but
Can you hear me now?
yeah, you're back.
All right. Okay.
I lost you there for a second.
Yeah, I don't know. The Wi-Fi's fine here, but I guess it's being a bit dodged tonight.
Yeah, you got about halfway through your explanation, and you were doing very well. You just got.
All right.
I heard everything up to you were talking about this mayor Forestater,
Yeah.
person, and
Yeah.
And what she believes and what she's been tweeting about, and then what happened to her.
Yeah.
If you could just pick up there.
Okay, so I'll just do it again. So we're talking about this lady, Maya Forstater. She works for, I believe, an economic charity, or she did work for an economic charity, and she holds two main contentions. One is that people can't change their biological sex, and leading on from that, that sexual self-identification, so people being able to say, I'm a man or a woman just by how they feel, causes problems, and she wouldn't accept a male or female person defined so at birth, male or male segregated space later in their life, whether they have a gender change certificate, whether they feel like they want to transition, whatever it may be. She doesn't think that that's a good view, and the judge in this case deemed that was an absolutist view, a view that wasn't worthy of respect in a democratic society, which I thought was a very strong thing to say. And basically, she's lost her job and been vilified as a transphobe on Twitter.
Yep. And then J.K. Rowling came out in support of this lady, making it clear that she said, dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consenting adult who'll have you, live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real, ? And then hashtag I stand with Maya, relating to this woman who was fired. So she makes it clear that she has nothing against trans people wearing, wearing whatever clothes they like and having, whatever kind of sex they want, and having and renaming themselves and using whatever pronouns they want. She only has a problem with getting women fired or getting people fired. She says women here, but maybe she only cares about her women. But anyway, it's only this ugly side of it she has a problem with. Apparently,
and I think it's worth saying that seems to be the same for this Maya Forstater woman. She seems very progressive on most things. She's happy for people to self-identify however they want. But the thing that really gets a bee in her bonnet is people transitioning and then going into sex-segregated spaces. For example, saying they're now a woman when they were designated a man at birth, and going into, say, a woman's refuge, or getting women's medical care, or claiming prizes that are for women, or whatever it might be. Otherwise, she seems quite happy, and I think that's the crux of this argument, is that it's a weighing of metrics between women's rights and trans rights. And I think the sad thing that happens in this case is you get two sort of extremist views throwing back their ideas at one another. So you get people on the Maya Forstater side who are very absolutist, like this, you should never let somebody, even if they have this diagnosis of gender dysphoria and they go through all this transition, they should never be allowed in a space that wasn't their designated gender at birth. And then the other people on the other side will call them a transphobe. And then on the other side, you have the people who say, look, we should just let people self-identify all the time and do whatever you want. There should be no restrictions whatsoever. And the people on the other side will say, oh, well, now you hate women. So you just end up getting these two extremist views fighting with one another. Whereas I think most sensible people are somewhere in the middle and say, look, people can self-identify however they want. You can call yourself whatever you want. But in certain circumstances, we're not going to be allowed to have that self-identification decide where you can go. For example, going into a woman's refuge or going into a woman's prison or accessing, female-specific reproductive services that have a limited amount of resources behind them, or things like this. So it's a toss-up and a weighing of metrics between women's rights and trans rights.
Yeah, I think out of those extremes that you just named, I think those two extremes collectively only account for about 1% of the population. Out of everyone, most people don't even care about this question, and then the people who do have, as far as I can tell, a very moderate position in between those two extremes. They'll acknowledge some trans people and not others, or they'll some. I think a lot of people consider the self-identification to be, kind of interesting, but not the only thing that matters, right? So they'll want. I think a lot of people will want to see that a trans person has made some kind of effort, that they actually are living by what they say they are about themselves. I don't want to go too much into that because I think everyone gets it already. That's why I didn't want to cover anything about this in the past, because it's all kind of just obvious, and I don't think there's really anyone watching this who takes either of these two really extreme positions. And
well, I think the thing that's interesting here, is that most people are quite happy with it. Most people will say, look, if somebody's gone to the doctor, they have gender dysphoria, they go through all of these transition things, that they're not a dangerous person, then maybe after that we can facilitate them, for example, going into a woman's refuge or a woman's prison, if that's what's best for them and it's not going to be harmful to the women. At the moment we have a situation where I believe, as far as I'm aware, people have to go through a period of certification. You have to go to a couple of doctors. They have to say you have gender dysphoria. They have to treat you for it. You have to get the correct medical diagnosis and treatment. And then after that, you can receive a certificate that says, in certain circumstances, you can be treated as the opposite sex to what you are. What that is, at the moment, is an imperfect way of balancing those rights between women's rights not to, for example, see a man in a woman's refuge and then feel scared, against the rights of those trans people to feel more included in society. So it's an imperfect way, but a balancing of those two metrics.
Yeah.
And you're not just running off, to the extreme on either side. The interesting thing is that the people on the extreme self-identification side usually fight against those attempts to let these people go through that certification process. They'll say that certification process is embarrassing, dehumanizing, this sort of thing. So there's no balance with them. You can't even get a sort of 90%, 80% solution. It's either 100% or nothing. And when you go for those 100% solutions, it obviously starts to trample on other rights. And people like this Maya Force start to jump up and say, hang about. We don't want men in women's prisons. We've seen issues with people self-identifying and attacking female prisoners and things like this. And when those other rights sort of get trampled on, then we get situations like this where people say, I've had enough and I'm going to take a stand against it.
Yeah, I think, you're right. It's interesting to me. The reason that this came up is that I believe it was to do with the Lib Dems writing in their manifesto that they were going to take self-identification as illegal, as legally binding, basically. I'm not clear on the details of this, but they said something in their manifesto. It was like one sentence long about self-identification being legally valid, if not in all situations, then in some. It would be sort of acknowledged by the relevant authorities. So I think that was what started off this sort of whole domino falling that led to J.K. Rowling now being now tweeting about this and and
being dismissed as a term.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and it's worth pointing out that I think there aren't that many people who are seriously upset with J.K. Rowling. There's a problem with, like I said before, the problem with social media is that you get these people, and maybe there's like a few hundred of them in the whole world, but if they are all very active on Twitter, then it looks like it looks like a crowd, right? Like if all of those people were standing outside your door, it would be quite a thing to behold. But these people are all scattered all over the world, and most people are just kind of shrugging their shoulders. I've never even heard of this story, or just don't care. I think, and it's a real shame that we let ourselves be bullied by this very small, very vocal crowd. I think, and I hope that J.K. Rowling doesn't stick down on this.
Yeah, well, I think the thing to realise is, and you kind of said it at the start before we got even into this, is that a lot of the people in the trans community don't even want this. It's some, very noisy activists. And it's not, when you say, look, there are issues with self-identification, prisons and refuges, you're not saying, as a lot of these activists will say, trans people are deviant, they're defective, they're predators, and we need to be, on guard against them. What we're saying is that whatever system you put in place, nefarious individuals will try to take advantage of that who are not necessarily trans. So you have to be very careful if you're just going to allow self-identification in all cases. There are some dangerous things that can happen, and that's not necessarily trans people who will take advantage of the system, but other people will take advantage of that system, and we have to be very careful that when we change one thing to try and make them feel more included, we don't accidentally open the door in other areas to horrible outcomes, as we've seen with prisons, as we've seen in some other areas. So it's not necessarily a problem that will come out of the trans community, but it's a problem that when you change a system that's dependent on so many other things, that other things change at the same time. Yeah,
it's definitely something that I think we're going to see more of coming up as an issue in the future. It doesn't seem to be a phase that's going away. It seems like we're going to keep getting this push from the activists for self-ID to be gospel truth, and I hope that doesn't. It's kind of irritating to me. Like Douglas Murray said in a recent interview about his new book Magnus of Crowds. He's saying it's such a waste of mental energy, right, to be arguing about this, like putting all of these young people, because they are primarily young people, getting young people so riled up about this thing that it only affects like 0.5% of the population, and out of that population of people, it's going to be we're making such a big fuss out of it, and all of our minds are being focused on this thing, and it's such a non-issue, I think.
Well, it's gone sort of, in some ways, it's gone sort of the same direction as the sort of the Me Too and the rape culture, where these stats have come out saying like now 2% of people are trans, because they've sort of changed the definitions to be people who are a bit tomboyish and this kind of thing. So you have these inflated figures, saying this is actually as common as people with ginger hair, which is just a very debunked stat. So people trying to make it a very mainstream issue when really it's not. We're dealing with a very small amount of people who I think most of them understand that people would like to be as accommodating towards them as possible. We've got things in this country now like RuPaul's Drag Race. Nobody cares about it. A lot of people love it. There's no sort of weird marches in the street to stop it. People just want to be cautious when it comes to delicate situations like prisons and such. For me, what you have to do, we use the sex binary as we define it, male and female at birth defined, to do some segregations in society for prisons, for women's refuges, for things like this. If you want to go with self-identification, you're going to have to show me a system which protects women to the level it does now and makes it more welcoming for trans at the same time. And I just don't see that system being offered. I just see it's one-dimensional. We must make trans people be more included or feel more included, and to hell with everything else. It just goes out of the window because trans people are at the top of the intersectional stack. And I think most people realise that this is more of a nuanced debate, and we'd love to be as inclusive as possible, but there's other issues that have to weigh in that debate as well.
Yeah, there's this thing that's unspoken, and it's been working for a really long time without us having to address it. And it's the fact that we need these sex segregated spaces, these gender segregated spaces, primarily for the protection of women. And partially as an aside, you also get privacy for men and women who would rather not be vulnerable, in things like toilets and changing rooms and public bathing, where that is a thing. Not really in this country, but in some countries where you can, saunas, things like that. When you're in a state of undress, people would rather be near people of their own sex. And it's so interesting to me the way that that's always been understood. And we've never needed a reason to justify why we should do that, why we should separate people in a state of undress when they're, it's like it's got something to do with sex, it's got something to do with assault. Doesn't really matter because that's just how we do it, and we don't have to talk about it. But now we're coming to this thing where it's like, okay, so why shouldn't a man such as yourself, Sam, let's just take you as an example, if you, without making any change to your body or to your, or clothes, your name, just say, okay, I'm a woman, I want to go to, female prison or, whatever. Like, why would that be not allowed? Because you, Sam, are not a sexual predator. You're not a pervert. You are actually not going to hurt any women. And yet your presence there, if you don't mind me saying, would make some women uncomfortable in the way that my presence wouldn't.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's one of those really interesting things. It's so subtle, it's like, I know you're not going to hurt me, and yet I'd rather just be around women if I'm going to be, in a prison or in a vulnerable state. I'd rather not have a man there, and this is one of those things that these feminists are saying, that they're trying to protect these female spaces. And it's like, it's hard to explain why, and it just sounds kind of stupid. And then you go, okay, well, why should your right to be, to your, what do you call it, your bigoted point of view, why should that trump a trans person's right to identify however they want and be in whatever space they want? And because this trans person has this claim to being oppressed, that then sort of trumps this very weird, undescribable quality that women want to have their own private spaces. And maybe you could tell me, what do you think the male view on this is? Like, how do you feel about having men-only spaces that could potentially be invaded? Because that's kind of being left out of the conversation as well.
Well, there's a different dynamic, isn't there, in sex segregated spaces? It's like you say, a lad's night out, for example, is different to if you're on a dinner date with girlfriends and things. And sometimes you want to go on a lad's night out, you want to have that sort of male-only camaraderie. So I think they are worthwhile in their own right. We have working men's pubs, things like this. If women are in that space, usually you act differently. Whether that's because societally you've been sort of told to do that, or naturally you do that. I think it's probably an element of both. As you say, when there's a mixture of the sexes, there's usually, to some extent, thing that goes on, and trying to look good to the opposite sex. There's a sexual element. There's probably a violence element, with men being on average stronger than women, and a sort of threat of violence potentially, and they're frightening. I think having those segregated spaces is worthwhile from the male perspective as well as the female, although perhaps in the male case, maybe, thinking just off the top of my head, there wouldn't be as serious consequences if women were allowed into those spaces, beyond perhaps some men being slightly uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's another part in Harry Potter, actually. It just came to mind when you said that, because the dormitories in Hogwarts are separated by men and women, like male and female, boys and girls. And the boys' dormitory, Hermione is constantly visiting Harry and Ron there. But then in one of the books where Ron or Harry tries to climb the stairs to the girls' dormitory, the stairs turn into a slide, and he slides all the way back down. And they find out that Hogwarts is actually quite sexist in the sense that they let girls into the boys' dormitory. They won't let boys into the girls' one. which again is it's kind of, you can see the logic in it without being able to exactly explain why that is. And if you don't mind me saying, I know you don't mind me saying, I don't know why I said that, but the thing is that sexual predators can be gay, right? So it makes sense to defend women from male predators, but then also, like, you're not exactly 100% safe from sexual predators if you're in a gender segregated space. So a man could be targeted by a male predator, or a boy could be targeted by a man who's much stronger than him. So it's like, it's not even a perfect system, right?
I think if you look at the stats, it's more nuanced than you would think. You would think if you put men in women's prison, it just all goes to hell. Sexual violence in women-only prisons, I believe it's still quite high, of a similar level, perhaps lower. I'll have to look at the stats exactly, but it's of a similar level. I think the issue here is, as you said, slightly more subtle, that you're putting people with the ability, to pin someone down, manhandle them, and the fear that comes with that. Just, if somebody was threatening me and it's an 18-stone bodybuilder, I'm going to be scared. If it's some weedy little guy, I'm not necessarily going to be as scared, or someone that I think I can, handle in a fight. So I think it's more subtle than it just being men in women's spaces. It's the power of that, and the sexual element as well, of the fear as well, as you said, which is perhaps a more subtle element that goes not put into the equation.
Yeah, this thing you alluded to, the strength differential between average man and average woman, defines quite a lot of these these sort of unspoken rules that we have on how men and women interact with each other. In the way that it's not considered that bad for a woman to hit a man, but it's considered absolutely terrible for a man to hit a woman. I think that comes from this difference in strength, because it is, you just are stronger.
These are the arenas where we see these issues flare up, right? So we're talking prisons, we're talking refuges where people could be violently or sexually assaulted. We're talking sports where men are on average stronger than women, so particularly contact sports. So a lot of these issues come about in these arenas of strength, of physical pursuits. And you notice that when we discuss these issues around sex, that any time there's any sort of mental differential sort of alluded to between sexes or different races or whatever, it's a very, very taboo subject. This is very much seems to err on the side of physical differences, because not the science isn't necessarily there for some of the mental differences, but also because the physical differences are, so obvious in a lot of cases.
Yeah, my channel got started a few years ago because of James Damore being fired. That was the case in America. Although I think this Forstater woman got fired. I think that she was in England, right? It was a UK place she was fired.
I believe it was an American country, but she was working for the European or England subsidiary. So I believe it was in England. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. This James Damore guy from Google got fired for pointing out several studies that showed that women and men have different interests when it comes to technological jobs and going into different lines of work, and that was considered extremely sexist. And then he was fired for that. And now we've got this. This kind of a recurring theme is this. Things that have nothing to do with your job, right? You come up with these beliefs that you have, and even if it has nothing to do with your actual work, you could get in trouble. And I don't know. I suppose I'm a little bit worried myself about getting in trouble for this sort of thing. For having
100%.
I don't think my that controversial, and yet I do worry about, like, my boss finding my YouTube channel sometimes, and it's
no, you're absolutely right. So in this case, the woman has not had her contract renewed for stating a fact. Now, a lot of people don't like that we use the male, female binary. They'll point to a small number of intersex people, things like this. But by the current definition that we have of being able to reproduce, she stated a fact. You can't change your sex. Now, I see a lot of scientific arguments coming out and being like the male-female binary is not very good. It doesn't tell us a lot of information about how aggressive someone will be or how intelligent they will be. So it's old hat and it's not worthy anymore. But a lot of people still use it. There's going to have to be a massive change in culture, in society, and an advertising campaign to get rid of it. So as we go now, she has stated a fact. You cannot change your biological sex as we define it. Defined at birth, male or female. You cannot change that. And here she's been punished, or the judge has deemed that that is not a fact, or it's not, at least it's not a fact that's worthy of being treated seriously in a democratic society. And I think that's a very dangerous thing for people to come in legally and say that. Look, you can say, look, I think she's got a bee in her bonnet about this unnecessarily. I think she's got quite an absolutist view. Maybe people with certificates can go into these different sex segregated areas. Fine. But I think she should be allowed to have that opinion, particularly as a lot of things that she stated are fact, and it shouldn't impact on her job. I don't think this is a legal matter at all. It's a matter where you go to work and you go, I think she's got a bit of dodgy views on this trans thing, and then you just ignore it and get on with your work. I don't think it should be a legal issue where someone's commenting on the appropriateness and the worthiness, sort of morally, of the opinions of an individual.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bad steps that would take you in this direction, but once we get to the point where where something is acknowledged to be true and yet you're not allowed to say it, so it's acknowledged silently, that's a really, you're pretty far gone. But just to play sort of devil's advocate, or to steelman this issue, I believe that it wasn't, as J.K. Rowling said, J.K. Rowling said that she was fired for stating that biological sex exists, so that you can't change your biological sex. I believe some people are saying that she was fired for saying that and more. You know, so it wasn't just saying that; it was saying this all this other stuff about she wouldn't recognize a trans person's pronouns or whatever. She wouldn't be, it's considered quite rude, to not acknowledge the program.
This was the main thing. The main thing that came out. So I read through the 26-page document of the judge's decision, and the main thing that came up was not that she doesn't accept biological sex can change, although he was against that as well. It was that she wouldn't accept someone who was defined male or female at birth being in a female or male space later in their life, even if they had a gender recognition certificate. So she took quite an absolutist stance. That's true to say that she took quite an absolutist stance. I think it's a stance that someone's allowed to have. Maybe I wouldn't be so forceful on the matter. However, I think taking that conservative view on a very important and controversial area where we have a discussion and work out the nuances of it is probably the safer default than saying just let everyone self-identify. So I think her opinion is probably more worthy than people who are just saying let everyone self-identify tomorrow and just see what the consequences are, because that's a potentially very dangerous situation to be in.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I didn't read it, so I'm glad I'm talking to you who did read this judge's statement. And I think it's a real shame the way that we have these judges, and the same thing happened in the Count Dankula case with the Nazi pug that I'm sure everyone is aware of, where the judge, this is a Scottish judge, said that he completely ignored the context of this guy's video and said that it was, I don't know the exact words, he said that it was not comedy. It was not protected under like free speech, comedy, laws or whatever, exceptions, because he said the judge denied that the video was comedic in intention, which is just completely bizarre to me. It's a very strange ruling, and these judges have a lot of power, and the only thing you can do is to take it higher in some cases. But if the highest judge in the country, like the judges who decided Boris Johnson broke the law, those are the highest.
Well, exactly. You go to the Supreme Court, and they seem to have similar views on certain things. So it's turtles all the way down.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really getting to something, because it's like, well, if the law, if you get right down to it, turtles all the way down and all that. If you get right down to it, these judges, the supreme judges in the UK, they are the ones who actually decide the legal precedent in cases like this, I believe. And if you as a citizen don't believe in what they said, and even if 99% of the country doesn't agree with it, like, what are we going to do? We're going to have a revolution? Like, just I honestly don't know what the legal recourse is if these judges are not presenting.
I think this is the problem, is that a lot of these laws or these decisions aren't actually in line with the majority of what people think. I think mostly people think, as I said, we'll try and be as inclusive as possible, but in certain situations we can't be, or at least there's a lot more study that needs to be done before we move forward, and we should be conservative. And I think the law is getting far out in front of public opinion, and that's getting blowback from people, because they're just like, what is this? Who's supporting this? Who's pushing this? Maybe it's another sort of people against the elite, that the elites are sort of, well, we need this is very important, this is very progressive, you should want this. And actually most of the countries, hang on a minute, can we be a bit more sensible about this, and can you explain to me what's going on? So maybe it's coming from that angle as well. But I think the fact that it's so out in front of public opinion and trying to go so fast is why we see a lot of blowback on these kind of things.
It's interesting because
there's another idea of, are you not allowed to be wrong? So even if it was a fact that you could change your biological sex by whatever definition these people want to use, is it not okay to be wrong? Can I not go out and state, E equals MC cubed, and that be a reasonable thing to say? I mean, it's that people are saying this is basically, we're going the hate speech route, right? We're saying this is literal violence. To say something like this is going to upset trans people. They have a high rate of suicide. Your speech is actually violence. It's not having an opinion. You're actually sort of putting physical harm on these people. And it has this really chilling effect that people who want to have this debate around self-identification and where these people should be allowed to go and what the methodology should be for certifying people are now scared to come forward and have these discussions. Because if they say the wrong thing, and the other side is usually needlessly obfuscatory, I think as a feature as much as a bug, then there's a chilling effect where people don't come forward and discuss these things. So you just get the extremists on one side pushing further and further and further, and you don't get this nuanced debate that we need to have on a very important issue.
I forgot what I was going to say now. It was about the law.
I'm just going to have to plug the power cable. I'm just going to plug my power cable.
I was just about to say that. I hope you can hear me. That I'm reading this book about English culture as well, and it sounds a little bit like leftist propaganda, and I have no idea what the author's political leanings are. But this guy says that tolerance is, well, at least was and maybe is to some extent a British value compared to the rest of Europe. And it's interesting, this idea of tolerance, because it's kind of two ways of looking at it. Because in one view we can say, okay, so we as British people, we're tolerant, and we tolerate trans people, no matter what sex you want to identify as. Doesn't matter. You shouldn't identify as whatever you want. And we protect your right to do that, and we're going to protect you from the people who are going to try and deny you that right. Well, on the other hand, and I think this is the way that most people interpret tolerance in England, you have this tolerance of thought, right? You tolerate other people, like Sam says, tolerate them being wrong, tolerate them being bigoted, as long as they're not doing any harm to anyone else. I think the culture is that you should tolerate other people's beliefs, no matter what they are, as long as they're not hurting you, they're not oppressing anyone else. I think a lot of people in Britain don't really care what you think. They just want to get on with whatever it is get on with your job, be ethical, just don't rock the boat. Like the idea of people getting fined for what they think, I believe at least is anathema to our culture and what most people think and believe at least. And
yeah.
This issue of tolerance, I think, is really the crux of the issue in modern politics. I don't know if you heard any of that, Sam.
I did. I heard all of it. Yeah.
Oh, great.
I just had to. The plugs are sort of weirdly spaced in the room, so the one over there didn't quite reach, and then the one over there didn't quite reach, so I had to move everything around.
Oh, well done.
So, I know, I made it in the end. The interesting thing on this, going back to J.K. Rowling, so J.K. Rowling jumped in, and obviously this is a very complex matter, but as I said at the start, she's very, very progressive, usually. She's a bit of a darling of the left. And yet the reaction to this was burn her books, cancel her. Yeah, it was the revolution eats its own. It was a very public example of that. Around a time where we just had the Labour defeat in the election, people were rounding on people like Owen Jones, people like Ash Sucker, for being very sort of PC. It was a very public example of that. If you're going to play this sort of woke game, no one is good enough, no one is famous enough, no one has done enough, no one is pure enough. They'll come for you eventually if you have one opinion out of place or one tweet out of place.
Yeah, I liked the last time we talked together on stream. We went for almost exactly an hour, and that was very pleasing.
Yeah.
I like the roundness of an hour. So I don't know what you told me. You had some notes written down. Have you got anything else that's like 8 minutes sized that we can fit? Sorry,
8 minutes size. No, it's all right. What have I got? Yes, maybe. So, what I wondered is, has this done more harm for the trans activists than it has done help? So I would say yes, because it's shown that there's an awful lot of unreasonable people on their side who are not willing to talk out this issue of self-identification. They're not willing to give any ground on the issue. They're not willing to accept they might be wrong in certain situations. And it shows that a lot of people, as I said, don't agree with their position. So if you look at the J.K. Rowling tweets, I think it's got hundreds of thousands, or at least sort of tens of thousands of retweets, hundreds of thousands of likes. You've got people like Ricky Gervais jumping in to protect J.K. Rowling. And it's shown that the trans people themselves, a lot of them, don't like the sort of anti-science, or at least science shifting around definitions of sex being done on their behalf. I think it's been really illuminating about the people who are sort of more militant on this on Twitter aren't necessarily the people who are going to be affected by it, which tends to be a recurring theme with people who, as you said at the start, try and do things for the common good, that they're not going to be the ones who have to deal with any unintended consequences of what happens from the policies they want to put in place.
Yeah, I think I'm a friend of Rose of Dawn, who's a trans YouTuber. I don't know if you've seen any of her videos, and she does
I've seen I haven't seen any videos.
Yeah, she does a weekly segment called Trans Stupid, where she's pointing out all of this sort of thing. She talks about them. She talked about this one when it first sort of broke the story, and the thing is that I think there are a lot of trans people like her who are they're really annoyed at all of this trans activist stuff, all of this authoritarian screeching stuff like that, because it just makes trans people come off as like delusional and crazy, right? So Rose of Dawn is aware that every cell in her body is a male cell. It's got an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, and I know that in some people, intersex, that's not necessarily the be all and end all, but that is a male cell. In 99.9% of cases, you find those cells in men, and we call it a male cell. And male chromosomes, male genetics, and she's not insane. She's not denying that her cells are are male, and to deny that is just to deny science, is to deny just it makes you look like a crazy person, basically. And when you and given that being trans is conventionally, I should say, sort of traditionally considered to be a mental illness, or having, to be associated with being kind of mental, I think anything that reinforces that stereotype of trans people being mentally ill or having a bad grip on reality, it's a very bad look for trans people who are just trying to get on with their lives, who aren't part of this mob. And I think it's really unfortunate for for people like her, and it seems from what I can tell that there are a lot of people like her.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of these people, I sympathise with them. There's clearly, they have an issue in their lives that they feel, they're not in the right body or whatever it might be. They have my greatest sympathy, and I think they can do whatever they want with their body. But as you say, I think it doesn't help their situation when the screechers come along and ask for things that they probably wouldn't want, or at least would be happy to accept. That we need to look at these things carefully and weigh them up as society is currently structured. Now, maybe, things will change over the coming years, but progress on these things is slow. And I think, as you say, a lot of the trans people realise that. They understand that you have to weigh up these rights of women with changing issues on trans. And yeah, as you say, the screeching just sets that back. It makes them look crazy. It makes them look militant. And most people are just normal people, as you say, trying to go about their everyday lives.
Yeah, I think the best thing for the trans movement is to maybe not even to highlight this, but just for trans people to be the best citizens, that the best people they can be, set good role models. But this is who I am. This is how I identify. This is how I dress. I'm not coming for you and your bad opinions. I'm not trying to get anyone fired. I just want to be left alone to do what I want. And if you could use my pronouns, that would be really cool. I'm not going to kill myself if you call me the wrong thing. And just to be good members of society. And they can go to their pride parades if they want, and celebrate themselves when when it's appropriate to do so. And I think that would be really beneficial for the movement. They don't get much visibility though, because it's just not.
I think most sensible people completely agree with you. I think 99.9% of people in the country, they might find it quite strange when they meet a trans person, because it's not a common thing that happens. That there are definitely some bigots out there and some people who will be mean. But I think most people are quite sympathetic and want them to be able to live their life in peace. They just don't want a lot of PC rubbish being pushed down their throat on their behalf, usually. And I think, as I alluded to earlier, looking at the sort of rejection of the Labour Party at the moment, running around calling people bigots, calling them racist, calling them sexist, calling them stupid, calling them unenlightened and unprogressive, is not the way forward to get any sort of progress, as you've said. So if you want progress on this issue, as you say, I would forefront people like that who want to have a sensible, nuanced discussion and explain, look, we would like to do a little bit more self-identification, and to facilitate that, we're going to, do these medical checks or whatever it might be. And you have these sensible voices at the table rather than the screechers who create a mirror in a lot of senses. So these screechers on the just let people self-identify side create the screechers on the other side, on the very hard, no, we're never going to let trans people into women's spaces, your Posey Parkers and stuff. I don't agree with a lot of the things that Posey Parker says. I think they're quite an absolutist position. A lot of the things Maya Forstater said, I think, are quite absolutist on the matter. But as you said, I think most people are in the middle, willing to listen to where we can allow trans people to feel more included, when we can let them go into spaces and it's safe, but they want to be careful and conservative and do more research to know when allowing that is appropriate and when not allowing it is also appropriate.
Yeah, well, we've made it to 6:01, so we're at exactly an hour, as I like things to be. But I would like to add, just finally, that to add to the point I was mentioning earlier about British culture, I think wonderful thing about British people, and I'm not saying this is all British people, but even people who deny deny gender dysphoria, you know, they people who completely disagree with all of it, people who would probably be considered an extremist, or maybe just consider your old bigoted uncle or grandfather or something, or grandmother, doesn't get any of this stuff at all. If they are approached by a trans person who's obviously trans, they probably won't even say anything. They'll just treat them like a normal person, maybe keep the interaction as short as possible, wait until they're gone, and then go, "What the fuck was that?" You know, then like, people are polite. That's what's it's quite a wonderful thing, is the way that you can be completely perplexed by someone, not understand what's going on there at all, and yet just tolerate it until the interaction's over. I think.
I remember we had a trans professor at Cambridge who taught astrophysics. No problem. Everyone thought, oh, that's a little bit different, you know. But you know, some people made some slightly harsh comments that people sort of just rolled their eyes at. But I think usually most people are reasonable and sensible, particularly to the person's face. You know, I don't see a lot of people marching in the street and saying, look, we hate trans people. And you know, you're going to get your idiots, of course, in any walk of life, and you're going to get bigots in any walk of life. But I think, as you said, in general, in Britain, in the current day, we're mostly, and most of the time, very tolerant.
Yeah, I just think it's nice to live in a country where even the bigots are mostly polite. Yeah, and I'm not trying to deny that there are some people who are rude or even abusive, you know, who commit assault and you know, might make a fight over it. Like, I think it's just nice to be in a place where people are polite to each other at the very base, you know, at the very least, even if they don't like each other. That's well,
I'm in Saudi Arabia. I'm in Saudi Arabia at the moment, right? And there's not many women drivers, and they've told some of the women here not to try and hail a cab by themselves without male supervision and such like this. So I'd much rather live in Britain than live in this country on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, well, I hope you come back soon, whenever you're ready, and you see older, beautiful, the green fields of Britain.
Old blighty. I'll be back before too long.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today and for chatting. Thank you, everyone who turned up to watch and left your comments. We'll possibly see you again soon. Sorry I haven't been making videos lately, but it is a lot easier for my schedule to do these live streams, so I hope you don't mind too much. But I will be making videos soon, possibly in the new year. I'm just trying to enjoy the Christmas period, so I'm sure you understand. And yeah, again, thank you, Sam.
Baby's first Christmas, so you've got to. Do you mind if I do a channel plug?
Yeah, I actually remembered to put your channel link in the description this time. So go to the description and click on the link.
Yes. So yeah, come over to Bad Boy of Science. Let's have a chat about some things, particularly if you disagree with me. Have a really good bunch of subscribers over there. We get into a lot of complicated and controversial science areas, politics areas. So yeah, stop by Bad Boy of Science if you have the time.
Yeah. Have a good night, everyone. See ya.
See you later, guys.